Am I a soldier of the cross, a follower of the Lamb? And shall I fear to own his cause, or blush to speak his name? Shall I be carried to the skies on flowery beds of ease, whilst others fought to win the prize and sailed on bloody seas?
We're here going to talk about birthright citizenship with Bob Quasius. Actually, I got this. Oh, the issue. How do we describe it? For centuries, the U.S. law, even before it was put in the 14th Amendment of the Constitution, said that if someone's born here, they're a citizen, with about four obvious exceptions. One is if you're an Indian, back a century ago they called them Indians.
Right.
And if you're an Indian and you are living on a reservation which where you don't pay taxes,
Right,
and
sovereign territory.
you aren't subject to the laws of the United States, and moreover, you might even be at war with the United States because you're a sovereign nation. Okay. Another exception was if you're born to an ambassador or to a family of an ambassador, and therefore you have diplomatic immunity, meaning no matter what kind of crime you commit, you aren't subject to being arrested by our police. All the United States can do is deport you back to your home country, but they can't arrest you and try you for a crime and put you in jail. Another exception is if you're born on a foreign ship. You might be in territorial U.S. waters, but if you're in a foreign ship, the laws of the United States do not apply to you, so therefore you're not subject to the jurisdiction of our laws. And everyone else, they're a citizen. It's been that way for 100 years. But that doesn't satisfy Congressman Steve King and Tom Tancredo and a few others, Congressman Bill Bray and Senator Jeff Sessions. They think they can overturn the 14th Amendment, a century of unanimous court opinion, by passing a law, by Congress passing a law. It's going to change the Constitution. Anyway, that's what our topic is about.
Okay. Actually, the history goes back much further than that. Back before the United States was even a country, English common law provided that anyone subject to jurisdiction of English law and was born in English territory was a citizen of England. And the only exceptions were children of foreign diplomats or invading armies. If the Vikings invaded and occupied part of England and some Vikings had children there, the children were not subject to English law because obviously they weren't living in English territory. So actually, English common law is part of our Constitution, from the very beginning of the United States. Now, in 1844, the infamous Dred Scott decision found that the Supreme Court of the United States determined that children born of slaves were not citizens, which goes against the English common law, and it's a very controversial decision. So after the Civil War, to ensure that, to basically overturn that decision, Congress made birthright citizenship part of the Constitution. And the use of term, if you're born in the United States and you're subject to jurisdiction in the United States, then you're a citizen. And the exceptions that Congress talked about, one is if you're born on an Indian reservation, well, you couldn't be sued, you couldn't be arrested, so you weren't subject to U.S. laws.
To this day, an example of the exemption which Indian reservations have from our laws is the fact that they can put up a casino anytime they want to.
Yeah, exactly. The states cannot prohibit that. So there's this argument today that that the children born of undocumented immigrants must be subject to jurisdiction of another country, and so therefore they're not subject to jurisdiction of U.S. laws, which I think is it's a ridiculous argument, because I mean, if they weren't subject to U.S. jurisdiction, that would mean they can't be deported, they can't be arrested, they can't be sued, and we all know that anybody born here, under the U.S. Constitution, is a citizen, and they can be prosecuted just like anybody else.
So I've got this big fat transcript from a 1997 U.S. House subcommittee hearing on immigration, with all kinds of these people making these arguments and the answers to them. We'll give you some highlights from them. And we have Bob Quasius here, who is an organizer for Somos Republicans, a new group which you characterize it.
Oh, we were founded in Arizona about 2 years ago. Somos, by the way, in Spanish means we are. So we are Republicans in Spanish. We formed in response to the hijacking of the Arizona GIP by some people with some very extreme viewpoints, such as Joe Arpaio, Russell Pierce, and trying to move that state into to create an environment that's very unfriendly to Hispanics. Many Hispanics are conservatives on many issues, and we think there's an ideological home in the Republican Party, but one big turnoff is the current rhetoric and extreme positions on immigration. Many Hispanics are offended by this and don't agree with it. So we provide an alternative. I mean, we're a Republican organization, but we're also grassroots. We're not part of the Republican Party. We're independent. We're free to criticize whomever we want, and that includes at times some Republican politicians. We even have a list. We had a list for the 2010 elections of Hispanic-friendly and unfriendly candidates, and yes, we did have some Republicans as unfriendly. Two of them here in Iowa, Jerry Branstad and Steve King. We think are both unfriendly because of their extreme positions, and in the case of Steve King, also he's used some rhetoric which many Hispanics find offensive, such as using the term anchor baby, which we think is a derogatory term and should never be used by a leader.
From this thick transcript here, the official transcript of the U.S. House Subcommittee on Immigration met in 1997. Here's a quote from Zoe Lofgren, a congresswoman from California who had previously been on the Board of Supervisors of a border town, but she's very much against trying to get around the birthright citizenship constitutional provision. She says the problem would be many American-born would-be citizens would instead be rendered stateless, citizens of no country. Many countries do not automatically ascribe citizenship based on parental citizenship. For instance, the child of an American born overseas can obtain derivative citizenship through its parents, but only if she returns to claim it within a set period of time. Therefore, a child born here to foreign parents could very conceivably be without a country, as would all of his or her descendants if he or she did not marry a citizen. These people would have nowhere else to go and would be forced to remain here, hoping to avoid detection by our government. With policies such as these, we would be creating perpetual generations of stateless, undocumented aliens. I don't see how this constructively addresses the illegal immigration problem. In other words, if we take someone that was born here, has no citizenship anywhere else, and the USCIS finds them, what are they going to do with them?
It makes a good point, because if you think about the arguments today, the rationale for tinkering with birthright citizenship is the claim that the pregnant women come here to have babies to get benefits for themselves. And in truth, under the present U.S. laws, a U.S. citizen cannot sponsor a parent for permanent residency until that child is 21 years old. And even then, if the parent has been unlawfully present in the United States for more than 1 year, they're subject to a 10-year bar on admission, meaning that they would have to leave the United States and come back. And of course, in coming back, they'd have to be sponsored first. It would take a couple years of paperwork. And then there's wait times for permanent resident visas. And so it's really, it takes quite a stretch of the imagination to imagine that someone comes to the U.S. to have a baby so that 31 years later, they might have a chance to come back as a permanent resident. So it really takes quite a stretch of the imagination. There are times, there is one provision under U.S. law where an undocumented immigrant who has been here for more than 10 years, that has good moral character, immigration judges do have some discretion to allow them to stay in the U.S. Wherever that happens, approximately 4,000 times per year. It's very rare that that discretion is used. Most times when the undocumented parents of U.S. citizen children are caught by immigration, they're deported. There's no real benefit to bringing them there. There's no welfare for the parents. There's no other government services, for parents of U.S. citizen children.
We'll do another show on those myths later.
Yeah.
But that's true. The closest to a government, let me take a minute. When FAIR did a study in 2004 saying that immigrants paid, the typical illegal family pays $4,000 in taxes but collects $6,000 in services, they're counting $3,000 as the cost of government waste. They just took the total government budget and divided it by the population, and so now if someone comes over here illegally, they're forcing the government to spend studies on the mating habits of Gunja frogs. Here's a quote it says the same thing, from Congressman Zolofgren, California. Some of my colleagues have also alleged that some aliens want to have an American-born child for the purpose of eventually legally immigrating as an immediate family member once the child reaches the age of majority. I taught immigration law at Santa Clara University and was an immigration attorney for a number of years. In all my years of experience in this legal field, I never encountered the situation in which a mother planned a birth so that 21 years later her offspring could file a petition that would be approved and numerous years later result in residence for the parent. I seriously doubt that such a tactic could ever be widespread or should be the basis for such a fundamental change in our Constitution.
There's 14 states where an affiliate of FAIR wants to introduce legislation to deny birth certificates to children born of undocumented immigrants.
Wow.
The Texas law, by the way, it's already been introduced, would make it a felony to use the temporary document they would give and claim U.S. citizenship.
All right. Let's see. Here's a quote from Brian Bilbray. Now, he's also a California congressman, and he is very anti-immigration.
He was a lobbyist for FAIR, by the way, before he was in Congress.
Really?
Absolutely.
Okay.
FAIR is a hate group.
He says the McKay versus Campbell case specifically said that to be a citizen of the United States by reason of birth, a person must not only be born within the territorial limits, but he also must be born subject to the jurisdiction, meaning the power and obedience of the United States. All right, so far so good. Clearly, a person who breaks our laws in entering our country is not obedient to the United States. What's he saying? This is classic irrationality. If a government had jurisdiction only over those obedient to it, then by definition, lawbreakers would not be under the jurisdiction of the government.
Well,
So therefore, without jurisdiction, no government would have any right to enforce any law.
that's correct. If these children were not subject to U.S. jurisdiction, they couldn't be arrested, they couldn't be deported. The only people present in the U.S. who aren't subject to U.S. jurisdiction are diplomats and their families.
Maybe this is too big a word, jurisdiction. It's certainly too big a word for Congressman Bilbray. Maybe we should explain it. See, if you're a parent, you have jurisdiction over your child. That is until some state bureaucrat decides that you don't. But up until then, you decide whether the child goes to a corner or goes for a timeout or, heaven forbid, gets spanked. If you're a teacher, you have jurisdiction over your classroom. If you are a boss, you have a jurisdiction over your employees. If you are a state, you have jurisdiction over the people in your state, but not over the people in another state. If you are a federal bureaucrat, then you have jurisdiction over state that crosses state lines, but you don't have jurisdiction over city laws. So in other words, the state highway patrolman doesn't arrest speeders within the city limits. See, because that's not the jurisdiction. Jurisdiction means where you have is the limits of your power to enforce laws within those limits. So if you are an immigrant and you can be arrested, that means the state has jurisdiction over you.
That's correct. The only people not subject to U.S. jurisdiction are diplomats and their families. So anyone born here, unless they're a diplomat's child, they're a U.S. citizen under the U.S. Constitution. And what's Congressman King says he wants to propose is a law to reinterpret the Constitution, to where if your parents are not citizens or legal residents of the U.S., then you're not considered subject to U.S. jurisdiction. But that argument is baseless, and if it ever made it through Congress and into the courts would surely strike it down, because a law cannot change the Constitution. Only an amendment can change the Constitution. And the 14th Amendment states that if you're born in the U.S., you're subject to U.S. jurisdiction, which is virtually all of us, then you are a U.S. citizen.
I want to launch off into the deeps here now. Here's a little bit more that Bill Bray says. H.R. 7, that's the law that they're debating back then, which would which would attempt to reverse the Constitution. H.R. 7 does not challenge any of these cases. Children born of legal residents are granted U.S. citizenship under H.R. 7. Children born of legal residents are still granted U.S. citizenship. In fact, no Supreme Court case has ever been tried involving illegal immigrants. Illegal immigrants just didn't exist during the debates of the 14th Amendment because we did not have any immigration laws at that time. Now that's interesting. Think about that. No Supreme Court case has ever been tried involving illegal immigrants. Illegal immigrants just didn't exist during the debates of the 14th Amendment. We did not have immigration laws at that time. So I got a question. The 14th Amendment says that all babies born here, unless they're, under one of the exceptions that we already talked about, all the babies born here that are subject to our jurisdiction are citizens. The 14th Amendment also says everyone who is here under the jurisdiction of our laws has the equal protection of the laws. Now, he just acknowledged that the Supreme Court has never tried a case involving illegal immigrants. I'm not sure that's true.
That's not true.
But he said it.
There's a case from the 1890s where two Chinese citizens came to the U.S. They had a child. The Later on, the child left the U.S. and came back and was denied admission to the U.S., claiming that because he was Chinese, he was subject to the Chinese Exclusion Act. And this man, by then he was a man, he argued that, well, no, I'm a U.S. citizen. The case went all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court. And, at the time, Chinese immigrants, immigration from China was not allowed.
Not a single person, not a single Chinese could immigrate legally between 1882 and 1942, 60 years.
Yep. So, in fact, the Supreme Court has already ruled on a case of this nature.
And in that case, the court decided that the child was born here, the child is a citizen. Okay. But the Supreme Court has not pursued this angle that I'm about to present here, and that is that if everyone here who's under the jurisdiction of our laws has equal protection of the laws, what kind of equal protection is it to be deported? I mean, you might as well say, if you can make the protection of their laws that unequal and call it equal protection, how much worse is it to offer to let them stay here and be slaves?
Well, the 14th Amendment was designed to ensure that we didn't have an underclass of citizens, namely the specific issue that why the 14th Amendment was brought up was to address the Dred Scott decision. Now, one other important point, there's also bills, it's already been introduced in Texas, it's planned for a total of 14 states, where the states would deny birth certificates to the children of undocumented immigrants and instead would give them a temporary paper. And the Texas law I've actually read, Texas law would actually make it a felony for someone to use that temporary paper that they would issue in lieu of a birth certificate and claim citizenship. So there's an attempt at the state level in 14 different states to effectively deny citizenship to the children of undocumented immigrants. And that's flatly unconstitutional, and that's flatly illegal as well, for the same reasons. The states cannot discriminate in services they offer. They can't deny a birth certificate to a child because the child's parents are allegedly undocumented immigrants. So that's coming up in the Midwest, it's coming up in Nebraska. It's already been introduced in Texas, and it's coming up in Arizona as well.
A little more history on that. I think this is talking about that court case back in the King Wong.
Yep,
Elk.
that's correct. Elk, I think, or Walk.
This is from Dawn Johnson. She was an assistant attorney general back in 1997, representing the United States. And she says the Civil Rights Act of 1866 came a little bit before the 14th Amendment. The Civil Rights Act could have been, they say about the same thing, but the Civil Rights Act could be reversed by future Congress much more easily than the 14th Amendment can be repealed, and that's why the Congress enacted the 14th Amendment after the Civil Rights Act. Anyway, the Civil Rights Act of 1866 provides, all persons born in the United States and not subject to any foreign power, excluding Indians not taxed, are hereby declared to be citizens of the United States. During the debates of that act, Chair of the House Judiciary Committee said the provision defining citizenship is, quote, merely declaratory of what the law now is. In other words, they're not saying anything new. And then he quoted a fellow named William Rawle, R-A-W-L-E, whose constitutional law treatise was one of the most widely respected works before the Civil War. Every person born within the United States, its territories or districts, whether the parents are citizens or aliens, is a natural-born citizen in the sense of the Constitution and entitled to the rights and privileges appertaining to that capacity. Not only the status of The framers intend the amendment to resolve not only the status of African Americans and their descendants, but the members of other alien groups as well. And Senator Cohen was quoted as saying, "The proposition before us relates to the children begotten of Chinese parents in California and is proposed to declare that they shall be citizens. We have declared that by law. Now it is proposed to incorporate the same provision in the fundamental instrument of the nation. I am in favor of doing so." So it was a conscious decision to make all people, even children born to parents who are not here legally, citizens. And now we're out of time in this segment, and let's see if we can get our heads together and prepare another show for you.
Hello, I'm Bob Quasius. I'm the Midwest Outreach Director for Somos Republicans. We're a Hispanic Republican group, grassroots, based in Arizona. We are not part of the Republican Party, but we share Republican values and most positions, except for immigration. We're moderates there. We favor reform of immigration laws as opposed to strict enforcement, which some Republicans view as a strategy for solving their immigration issues. We're a grassroots Republican group based out of Arizona, now expanding nationwide. We have approximately 6,000 members as of this time. You can find out more about us on our website at www.somosrepublicans.com. And if you'd like to join us, go to our website, put your email address, and you become a member. It's that simple. There's no membership fees. It's very straightforward. Today I'd like to talk a little bit about the anti-immigrant movement. The anti-immigrant movement is largely driven by the Tanton network of organizations. That includes the Federation of Americans for Immigration Reform, includes Numbers USA, includes Center for Immigration Studies, and
Tanton
at least
being the name of a man.
Right. John Tanton founded these groups, and contrary to what some might think, he's not a conservative at all. He comes from a population control background. He's very strong on conservation. He's been a Ralph Nader supporter. He describes himself as a progressive. He founded the Northern Michigan chapter of Planned Parenthood. And
For people not acquainted with the population control term and where it stands on the political spectrum,
very liberal, actually, very progressive.
Population control is the guy that is the idea that drove Margaret Sanger and Hitler. The idea that we have certain superior races that ought to prosper, and survival of the fittest dictates that we eliminate the inferior races.
Yeah, and one thing I find very interesting, I have a book here called The Passing of the Great Race, or The Racial Basis of European History. This book was written in the early 20th century by a well-known early progressive. His name was Madison Grant. He was friends with Margaret Sanger. He was friends with Teddy Roosevelt. He was friends with quite a few progressives of that era. You could find the book reprinted. I was able to get this on Amazon. But it refers to Aryans, Teutonics. It's amazing how many terms are in this book that were also used by Hitler, at a later date after this book was published. This book during the Nazi era was also the only American book translated into German and available freely in Germany. It was also used as an exhibit at the Nuremberg war crimes trials, because actually a lot of this came from a lot of the Nazi theology about the Aryan races and so forth. Actually, it came from America. It came from early modern progressives.
Let me back up and give an overview of our topic here. I have noticed and written about for years about how this population control aspect is the same thing we're hearing in immigration as we had heard previously from abortionists. The idea that Earth is getting too crowded, we need to kill a bunch of babies so that we can put the Earth back in balance. And some goes so far as to say that the Earth's population needs to be reduced by 2/3. I saw that in a particular piece of literature that was passed out at the Iowa State Capitol in an Al Gore rally. 2/3. Well, how do you do that? A war, or you can wait for the Great Tribulation. God promises this about how much it'll be reduced. Well, it looks like these people are going to be successful. Anyway, so I have noticed that this same mindset, we have too many people, is shared by abortionists and the immigration movement. What Bob is able to document is that this sharing of mindset is not coincidental. It is conscious. The people of one are funding the other. The FAIR, F-A-I-R, the organization which supplies Jan Michelson with information and Tom Tancredo, FAIR is funded by the Pioneer or something or other, Pioneer Fund.
Yeah, FAIR in its early days received millions of dollars from the Pioneer Fund, which promotes eugenics, which promotes scientific research into proving that whites are superior to other races.
And FAIR has Planned Parenthood people, has abortionists on its board.
That's right. John Tanton himself founded a chapter of FAIR. He's not an abortion doctor, but he is a medical doctor. There's also 2 members of FAIR's national board that are also members of the board for Planned Parenthood. There's a lot of ties and connections there. A lot of people at FAIR came out of the population control movement.
So these are the kinds of things we're going to bring out a bunch of Bob is going to bring out a bunch of documentation to tie the loose ends together, but that's our goal. It's really weird because Republicans ought to be embarrassed that they are buying all this anti-immigration rhetoric from a population control group. And Democrats ought to be embarrassed that their wonderful abortionists are getting involved in an anti-immigrant group.
That's right. John Tanton is a self-admitted progressive. He supported Ralph Nader for president years ago. He founded a chapter of Planned Parenthood. He's very much a progressive. He's big into conservation. He prefers nature and trees to people, and people are like pollution to him.
So you're telling us a little about this book. Tell us a little bit more about what's in it and how it proves this conscious connection.
Well, the book talks about basically that Western and Northern Europeans are superior to Southern and Eastern and also non-Europeans. And the Pioneer Fund that we talked about also funds a major anti-immigrant group that was very active in the second decade of the 20th century, and into the third decade, the 1920s. And they succeeded in passing a set of laws that was very restrictive on immigration. It particularly limited immigration from Southern and Eastern European nations, and it also barred immigration from non-European nations. To give you an idea of the impact and its relevance to today, as I mentioned, immigration from Southern and Eastern Europe was severely restricted as a result of this book and that movement, which is headed by early modern progressives who also promoted Planned Parenthood and eugenics and forced sterilizations. But the result was, within a few years after the severe country restrictions, there was 3 to 4 million illegal immigrants in the United States from Southern and Eastern Europe. And the result has always been the same. Whenever immigration starts to fight with the free markets, where the free markets need workers, people want to come, they want to work, when it becomes extremely restrictive, the result usually is the same. People come anyway. And it's a matter of, it kind of goes back to conservative philosophies of free markets. that if we support free markets, then we support, reasonable levels of immigration. When government tries to overly restrict immigration to where, the opportunities are here anyway, the result has usually been people come anyway. That's not to condone people breaking the law, but it's to show that as a matter of policy, when our policies become very restrictive on immigration,
Well, it's like saying
we have problems.
if you can pass a 5-mile-an-hour speed limit on the freeway, people are going to break the speed limit more than they do now. And it's not that we're saying that people should break the law. It's just that, in America, we don't have a police state. So that requires that our laws be reasonable enough that most people will voluntarily see their benefit.
Exactly.
We don't have that problem. We don't have the situation with immigration.
Yeah.
We have half of our voters can't buy into the justice of the system.
Yeah, majority of Americans favor immigration reform. So a couple of things I want to mention about John Tanton is he's written extensively about eugenics, and some of it is actually pretty shocking. He donated his papers to the University of Michigan Library, and a number of those papers can be found on the internet. I suggest Googling John Tanton and passive eugenics, and you'll find one of his shocking papers. There's also a series of interviews on YouTube about John Tanton, and he talks about population control and conservatism and radical environmental causes. Progressives of both of the early 20th century and today believe in using government for social engineering. That government can form and shape the perfect man.
Help me out with this word progressive. I always thought progressive meant someone who is advanced.
Yeah, they view themselves as advanced, and they have this notion that the government can do a better job than free markets can, and that's why progressives...
I never thought of Hitler as offering an advanced civilization.
Well, Hitler used something similar to class warfare, except with him it was about race. Early modern progressives use both race and class warfare. Modern progressives these days mostly have dropped the racial aspects of it. But the progressives behind the anti-immigrant movement try to downplay it, but every once in a while it comes out. For example,
So is it fair to say then that to define the word progressive as what progressives themselves would like to think of themselves as, but in fact what they offer is a barbaric culture?
well, they believe in using government to shape man, and that means giving government more power, and it can result in very repressive types of measures, which certainly did during the under the fascists in Europe. I view fascism as kind of an outgrowth of that. But the Nazis believed in national health care, they believed in eugenics, they believed in more and more government power and control over the economy, which is very similar to what the progressives in this country wanted, but less of an authoritarian state. But it's the same idea. More government, more power, more control over individuals, less individual freedom, which are exactly the opposite of what conservatives want. I mean, conservatives believe in limited government. They believe the less the government touches, the better off we are. But on immigration, I think what's happened here is one element of the anti-immigrant agenda has resonated, and that is control of illegal immigration. But if you look and you study carefully the agenda of FAIR and Numbers USA, they not only want to strictly enforce the existing laws on illegal immigration, they want to roll back legal immigration to 1956 levels, which would be a reduction of about 75%.
So you're saying that right now we allow about 500,000 to come legally. In that line, the 10 or 12 million that are already here are also trying to get in that line, and some of them are already in that line because the we stretch the line out for the next several years when the slots are closed for this line. Okay, so now you're saying the 500,000 would be reduced by 75% down to 125,000.
I think the total today is actually more than 500,000. Once you include guest workers who can adjust their status.
It's a little more than that. I think, well, what I've seen is that it varies a lot from year to year. And 500,000 is kind of a rough average.
Well, that's been the level since
It can be
1990.
300,000 one year and 700,000 the next.
The quota hasn't changed since 1990, and actually 1990 was an increase over the 1965 quota.
It's not a fixed number because it is pegged to how many applicants have citizen parents or adult children.
No, actually, it is a fixed quota. The Congress has to change it. It has not changed since 1990. Now, what has changed is the waiting time. Right now, for some prospective legal immigrants who happen to be brothers or sisters of U.S. citizens, the wait time is up to 30 years. It's a very, very long time. So what's happening is there's preference categories.
When you say it's up to 30 years,
Yeah.
you don't mean to say that there's an absolute limit so that when 30 years comes, they'll say, okay, it's your time, now you get to come.
Yep, that's exactly what I'm saying.
Oh?
If you're the brother or sister of a Filipino U.S. citizen, and you applied for permanent residence, or you were petitioned for permanent residence 30 years ago, your turn in line is just now coming up. I mean, that's how backlogged the system is. And similar wait times for Mexico as well.
I still can't believe this. You can't be saying that they will actually, they will absolutely definitely not make you wait for 31 years.
Right.
Huh, okay.
That's the current wait time for that particular group.
That's if you have a brother or sister.
And you're from the Philippines, because there's also country limits. I mean, no more than a certain percentage can be from the Philippines, or any country. And the Philippines is up against this limit. I believe Mexico is as well. So if you're from the Philippines...
Can you imagine waiting 30 years to reunite with your sister?
Right. And then imagine cutting immigration levels back to 1956 levels. That 30-year wait might become a 60 or a 90-year wait. But that's how restrictive our current policy is. And if you aren't a highly skilled professional that can come here on an H-1 visa, or the immediate relative, such as a brother or sister, or father or daughter of a U.S. citizen, there basically is no line to wait in. But if you listen to the anti-immigrant movement, they make it sound as if all these people coming here illegally just refuse to wait in line, but they don't recognize that there is no line for them to stand in. There's a lot of shortcomings in our current system of legal immigration, yet there's a lot of jobs here for unskilled workers. And we believe the disconnect between our current system and our need for workers has been a driver for decades of the issues that we have. And we need to reform our system to where if we have quotas, these quotas reflect needs, not the desires of some population control progressives who are in fact now driving much of the policy. The part of their agenda that gets the most attention is the enforcement of illegal immigration, but in fact the other parts of their agenda are to reduce overall immigration levels, to basically roll things back by about 55 years to 1956 levels of immigration. And of course the result of that would be that much longer wait times. We still wouldn't have enough workers to fill a lot of these jobs, because if you look at demographically what's happened in the U.S. since 1956, we have much higher graduation rates from high school, meaning there's a lot fewer high school dropouts who typically would fill the types of jobs that many undocumented immigrants fill. The population of the U.S. has more than doubled since then. Our economy has grown by around 500%. So the problem with the government determining quotas is that it's subject to a lot of political pressure. doesn't get changed very often, doesn't get updated, is very inflexible, and is very complex. So we really need, if we want to solve this problem, we need a complete overhaul, of our current system of legal immigration. And it's our belief that if we provided a line to stand in, and we had reasonable wait times, and we offered guest worker visas, for example, for unskilled workers, right now the limit is 5,000 under the H-1 program, versus we have, perhaps 9 million illegal immigrants working in unskilled jobs. If you do the math, it's obvious that the quotas for that type of workers is a tiny fraction of what the needs of our economy are. So that mismatch is one of the drivers, and we think that the best way to stop illegal immigration is to provide a reasonable guest worker program and provide higher immigration levels that reflect the growth in our economy. And most economists agree that immigration is a positive for economy, that immigrants contribute more than they consume in services.
One practical problem I've seen with legislation proposed to create this, to expand these guest worker programs, temporary things, is that the employer has to advertise to see if a citizen will take the job, and wait 3-4 months for that. And then, it's been too long since I looked at this. The problem for an employer is you don't. These rules eliminate the possibility of you ever interviewing a person. You can't go down into the other country and recruit people. No, you have to come back and then advertise for the job and wait 3 or 4 months, and it would work for. The only thing it'll work for is like orange picking, where you don't need to meet the people ahead of time. But like if I wanted to hire someone, if I couldn't find anyone to work here at the music store, there's just no way I could meet the rules. There's no flexibility to them.
Well, this goes back to a philosophical argument as well, that who can do a better job of determining what our needs are for immigrants? Is it government or is it private industry? And your example of agriculture workers is a good case in point. Before the Bush administration, there was a bunch of regulations and rules in place. Basically, farmers had to wait until a certain time before they advertised for those jobs. Then they had to wait and not fill the jobs. Then they had to apply for the permission to bring in, and by the time they got permission, harvest was already passed. So what ended up happening is there were actually visas for agricultural guest workers. They weren't being used because things were so tied up in regulations and red tape that farmers couldn't get the workers they needed through that route.
Have we tied up the connection with between abortionists and anti-immigrationists?
Yeah,
So
there's
you haven't-
definitely a confluence.
Is there any other documentation you have to share here?
I don't have it with me, but I would suggest Googling John Tanton on the internet and watching some of his interviews on YouTube. And there's been quite a bit of research and documentation produced. He donated his papers to the University of Michigan library, and quite a few of those are available on the internet. They showed his real agenda is population control. It also shows that if I might give an example, in one of his papers, he actually says that he thinks the United States should have a significant European American majority, and a big one at that. So it comes out from time to time from the anti-immigrant movement. They're not just against illegal immigration; they're against all immigration, and they're against immigration from non-Europeans in particular. So there's really more to this. Now, it's not to say that someone can't be opposed to illegal immigration. Somebody can be opposed to it for policy reasons and believe in an enforcement-only strategy. What I'm saying is that the groups that are behind much of the information that's put out there, they do have another agenda.
Where this should be important to Republican pro-lifers is that if it weren't for this objection that we're letting too many people come to the United States and we just don't have room for them. If we can dispense with that and recognize and apply to that the same answer that we give to abortionists, how much space there is, how the whole world could come here and live in California and live, you know, have a house lot for everybody. The planet is not crowded, except what makes people crowded is political situations that don't allow freedom. If we can get past that, then an actual solution to immigration presents itself. If we can repeal numerical limitations, let everybody come who meets the qualifications that citizens do, learn a bit of English, enough English to get by, so that you don't have to have a government translator. Stay out of jail for doing things which citizens, if they did them, would be a crime.
Mm-hmm.
And just let people come. Then all of a sudden people are able to come through the border at the checkpoints. Get your fingerprints taken, your biometric iris scans, or whatever they're going to do to you. Sign up, let the USCIS know where you are so that they can come after you if you don't meet their conditions, which would be a temporary program.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we think that immigration should be based on free markets, not on arbitrary quotas.
If people can come through legally, then all of a sudden we have no more border problem. We don't have people crossing the border illegally, except instead of millions, now then we'd have maybe a few thousand of the real criminals.
Right.
And who would then be much easier to catch.
Yeah, it'd be much better for the Border Patrol to focus on the criminal element, which they already try to now. But why enrich these criminal gangs by basically putting immigration into their hands? One other analogy I like to make, I view this as a little bit like Prohibition. During Prohibition era, we had lots of people consuming alcoholic beverages. People consuming alcohol generally were not the criminal element, but the people involved in distributing alcoholic beverages, they were very much the criminal element, and there was a lot of violence associated with that. Well, once we got away from that strategy of, well, let's just not allow alcoholic beverages to, well, let's allow them but regulate it. Well, now we effectively took the distribution of alcohol out of the hands of the mafia, and we put it back into private hands with sensible government regulations. You could view immigration as the same way, that when we try to unreasonably restrict it, what happens is people do come anyway, and we don't condone that. We'd like for people to follow the law, but the people who are profiting off of that quite often are criminal cartels who also smuggle drugs and weapons and so forth. So we think it's a lot more sensible to provide adequate legal means for people who want to work here or immigrate here to come. And whenever there's been unreasonable restrictions, and this has been shown historically, throughout U.S. history, whenever there's unreasonable constraints placed on immigration, as opposed to what the free market is calling for, the problem has always been people come anyway. And go back to your analogy about if we had a 5-mile-per-hour speed limit on the expressway, we'd probably have a lot fewer accidents, but we'd also have a lot of people driving over 5 miles per hour.
We'd have fewer accidents because everyone would be in jail.
Right. So we do need to have reasonable laws to start with, and we have reasonable laws, the enforcement becomes much easier because most people will obey, reasonable laws. So there's a policy aspect to this as well. And again, please visit our website, www.somosrepublicans.com. On the internet, and we'd be glad to have your support. Thank you.
I come to land where the people are happy, where there is so much opportunity. I get a job, I work hard, I pay taxes. But one more thing people say to me. They tell me, get in line like everybody else. You are legal, you broken the law, that smells. Why no army, folks like me expelled? Get in line like everybody else. I asked lawyer where this line I can get in. He fill out forms and my fees I begin. 20 years later, the court still deciding if I'm in line, but still I can't win. They tell me, get in line like everybody else. You are legal, you broken the law, that smells. Why no army, folks like me expelled? Get in line like everybody else. Well, 15 years now I'm finally a legal. I'm still in line, 30 years more I vote. In 13 years more my wife can come see
Perdón,
me.
Sanchez.
She knows swim, she can ride in a bar. But folks say, get behind me in bureaucratic hell. You are legal, you broken the law, that smells. Why no army, folks like me expelled? Get in line like everybody else. Ándale, ándale. Arriba, arriba. Marchando, bandido. Immigration laws are like a speed limit, 5 miles an hour on the interstate. We should be ashamed of ourselves to defend it. Fix those lines so no lifetime we wait. They tell me, get in line like everybody else. You are legal, you broken the law, that smells. Why no army, folks like me expelled? Get in line like everybody else!
When decent moral people can't say what they believe because it would offend a jerk.
Dave Leach says it's no surprise that fools' cries fill the skies. Let's make freedom of religion work.